Airí amach 1960 in ein seachtain amháin bhí Black Lia in the Réab ag Réabhlóid. Duine de fíorghascin na héireann Margaret Skinnider ó Glasgow na Halban a heistil an áil. Céir bhí héin agus céir de thugann seoí. The réhan airí amach bhí Countess Markovic in líise gá scór, léach mór agus ceann ródaí de bhróga. Wascail sí mrá nús Margaret bhí curtha ag ceart mrá agus tréinailte le clubbanna gunna na Breataine. Tréináil a bhí an úsáideach de Cumann na Glasgow. Heistil Margaret timpeall na cathrach le teachtarachtaí tábhachtach míleata. Le nobar seo dhéanana fuair sí ísacht rothar ó Nóra Connolly, iníon James Connolly.
Dublin City, during Easter week 1916, was a battlefield. It was one of the most dangerous places in the world, as dangerous as that of the Western Front in France. Artillery shells were pounding Sackville Street, now O'Connell Street. Every corner there were snipers positioned, both Irish and British, and machine guns rattled throughout the day and throughout the night.
Watha le cumarsáid idir na fórsaí, thug Margaret teachtarachtaí sáil agus an áil ón GPO, ag Connolly, ag Clark agus ag Bírsach. Gléiste an áide agus tuisgur bannaí, bhí níos lú ghuail go geisneach arm na Breataine í.
Scéal intach simúil gur hon sí trasna an ruthar chun páirte a ghlachas an éirí amach. Ach bhí an ceangail sin a gcónaí ann idir an Alban agus an tír seo agus bhí daoine dul trasna go Glasgow agus carthracha eile ag glóra obair. So ní chuirc sé aontas aon dana go raibh an ceangail sin arán go bheith simig na daoine in Alban a bhí tarlúin seo in éireann agus go raibh daoine ann sásta teachtarráise agus tríd ar son na saoirse sa tír seo.
Bhí Margaret rééis ábhar pléasca chomhthortaisteach go héireann ribhe seo do Countess Markovic, go lárónad na Réabhlóide teachsaí bóthar Leinster rapmuoinis Black Lia. Áite chud a fáilte roimh chola air agus banó go bhí suite le cás na Réabhlóide. Rinne Margaret chur síos head tréimhse seo nar rinne sí aglah na radioéireann in Léide Caracha. Deis sin ar a heistil sí ar a mád as Glasgow gur ábhar pléasca fin na háta agus srangan a fin na gúna. Rud a chur riméid ar madam mar a thug siara. Seo hí Margaret Skinnider san aglah sin.
Countess Markovic was second in command. I first met Madam, as she was affectionately known in Dublin, at her home at Surrey House, Rathmines. Madam, who kept open house for all the Friends of Ireland, who founded the Fianna, who opened her house to the strikers in 1913, who spent her money on arms and ammunition, who shouldered a rifle for the freedom of our country.
She is Sancho Panza to Countess Markovic's Don Quixote, and the bicycle is Rosinante, I have to say. But that's how I see her.
Thanks, Violet.
There's this metaphorical of tipping the forelock. This is an aristocrat. OK, she looks very shabby. She was shabby because she was poor. Genteel, shabby, genteel poverty she lived in. And so Margaret met this woman, but she is Countess de Markovic. Sounds really exciting. And she came to believe herself to be well got with her. You know, to be well got with the great.
Yara agus rinne Countess Markovic colla bread in na hóglaí mrá agus na fianna óga, le brístí, cris agus stocaí, ach de bhargas rinne sí colla dintas crackan chuo chanóine, a dog Margaret anmhórtasach.
I don't think she would have felt any great need to kowtow or tug the forelock to Countess Markovic in any sense. She had a very kind of strong notion about equality among women, as well as wider notions about equality in Irish society.
Bhí mrán ar an bhád níos gníomhí sa saoil políteach ná mar bhí hena féin caiim ar rá. I cúpla slí, bhí si páirteach sa glúise cultúra ag an am seo, agus an óig nédig sé déag ní raibh an bhóta ag an rá, so bhí si sinna lorga go chomá. So tháinig an dáróid seo le chéile, so bhí si gníomhach, bhí simachas sa políteacht, agus bhí si dhéirí bheith páirteach a bhí ann. Agus bhí cúpla duine chomá, cúpla má chomá bhfuil go má le go ní, so tháinig an rudí seo go léir le chéile nédig a séide.
Céir bheith sa dánig Margaret? Céir de bhealaí bheith páirteach sa Réabhlóid? Agus cefá sí chud tilteanach saidirí na Breataine ó Aró. De bhanú broch bhaile Hotbridge in Glasgow I Margaret. Dunne de dram imracóí éireannacha a bhí measc híon trían de réanra Glasgow ag an am. Bhí mór thunscail éireann sa cheantar le neart fostaíocht. As muoinechan a hathir James Skinnider agus as cundan na mí a tháinig mothir Jane Dowd. Bhí Margaret cáilí mar bhúntar mata ach bhí a cruí agus a hánam a gultúr láidir náisiúnachas gaelach sa slap-up mar a tugu an éire beg se.
Bhí lonaíochtaí ins na mórcharcha in Albain agus is asanna go éannaigh. Go raibh na measc daoine a bhí dingháilte san siar sin na héireann. Daoine a bhí nimhnach in cheannas hasanna éireann, nó cheannas na bretainna éireann. Agus dar sin ins na glúiseachtaí go léir idir glúiseachtaí cultúra agus glúiseachtaí cóteige nós na finíní. Bhí an tradiisiún son ann, agus bhí an náisiúnachas áirithe son agus ga cuide a bhainans le cuasaí cultúras, le cuasaí políteacht agus mar sin de, bhí sé sin in Glasgow ach go háire. Agus as a gúlra sin ar nó do bhna na héireann as do bhna muoinechan í. As a gúlra sin a fáisciúí, agus í fósan na hóide. Hánig sí faoi onáil agus faoi cheannachar na glúiseachta son, agus dáin sé léhí go dtíon deire.
Like many of the Irish in Scotland, she became kind of imbued with a lot of the kind of class politics of industrial Lanarkshire, you know, the county in which Coatbridge was based.
They were involved, listening to their parents, the songs of Ireland, the music of Ireland, the language of Ireland, and so they're joining these Gaelic clubs, and this idea starts to premate the clubs. And she was young, she was impressionable. She enjoyed it. It was something that she really wanted to do.
Bhí Margaret Skinnider in a ball de Brancha Ann Devlin de Cumann in Glasgow. Marásách mílete a bhí trénáilte hána ag globan I gunnaí. Bhí rá aimacab, carta vótala agus corramíoch sóisialta.
Cumann were politically radical in that they wanted, after 1916, it was about having a republic, a 32 county republic. They were politically radical, but socially they were exceptionally conservative. They're going to raise money to help the Irish volunteers buy guns, ammunition, and so forth. They were there to be at the first aid, nursing if anybody was injured. Then they were going to be making the tea. Which is what they did, and they did the food, and then like in 1916 they were the dispatch carriers or the couriers, and they were more or less the roles that they were involved in.
She was also involved with a gun club to kind of train women to learn how to shoot, and what was expected to be a very militant struggle to try and achieve the vote at that stage before the First World War, when the women's suffrage question was becoming increasingly militant. Oh, smail on me. You know, tá sí Jackar in Rodella faoin bhain sin, you know, she's a kind of inspirational character. She's what nowadays people might see as tomboyish, you know. She dressed up as one of the Fina boys, tried to pass herself as that. I mean, she's quite an adventurous kind of character, like many of the kind of suffragist women, you know.
Bhí scial ag Margaret Skinnider in na bómaí, ábhar pléascán, catha orachar, scial a roinntí leis an glúiseacht óg na fianna. Buachalaí óga chothóg le rábhlíon déag a bhí a dréaná le Countess Markievicz agus Margaret Skinnider is sléifte chiilvántáin, sé bhí rihannéirí mach. Chur sé seo le eisling agus felsannacht a bhí go bírsach maide leis an glún óg. Chéad lá na Caismirte, luan cásca an fé cearúlá go eibreán 1960. Chua Margaret Skinnider go faiche stífne. Fhui cheannasaíocht Michael Mallon agus Countess Markievicz. Céad fear agus chearach an dhéag mrá leo.
It was a great moment for me when between the branches of the trees I caught sight of men in dark green uniforms coming along in twos and threes to take up their positions in and about the green. Their numbers were few, but behind them I could see in the spring sunlight those legions of Irish men who made their fight against us heavy or heavier odds, and who, though they died, had left us their dream to make real. Perhaps this time, I thought, At last all the men were standing ready, awaiting the signal. In every part of Dublin, similar small groups were waiting for the hour to strike. The revolution had begun.
Bhí sé gníomhach bhaithe Stephen faoi Michael Mallon agus faoi Countess Markovitz. Agus nuair a dearm gníomhach is gníomhach atá rá. Sé sin rá heasta go bheith pártach, heasta go bheith scaoile, ní heasta go bheith daamh le teachtarachtaí agus daamh leis an obair sin a go háirithe. Ach, tháinig sías.
Monday night we spent in Stephen's Green. On Tuesday morning we realised that our position was untenable, as British troops had succeeded in gaining possession of the Shelburne Hotel and were firing on us from the roof. We then evacuated the Green and took possession of the College of Surgeons. Before we left the Green, we lost one of our men, James Fox, who a few moments before had been singing "Wrap the green flag round me, boys."
We're talking count an áin bhí sé fachas Sifán bhí seanna tábhtar fad tuscraibh Countess Markovitz ann agus Beiger tuscraibh sisin a ceanara sa chuid sin den chathair greibh mrá eile timpeall orthaí ag an am. Ach bhí siad san áte eile chomá, bhí siad dar nói, bhí siad ar sa GPO agus áiteanna eile. So ní amháin fachas Sifán bhí siad an gach áit sa chathair.
Háasta bhfuil Margaret bheith geart lár an chatha, chuir sí fuatha ar bhár urlár colas na mán lia. Chashi orachar le aram na Breataine.
Being a sniper is a very difficult job, not only in today's army, but in past armies as well. Margaret Skinnider would have held a .303 Lee Enfield rifle, a very heavy weapon with a great recoil as well. Margaret Skinnider was a very able, skilled markswoman. She would have been very used to firing long distances, picking targets and gauging the wind and light.
Bhí Cumann amán gníomhach in éidir go sé déir. Bhíidir tríd is tríd a tuairteara do iad siúd go raibh scéal leiise chun ó scéal banaltreachta go bhíidir tuairteara do nó daoine bhí leonta, bhíidir a déanamh tuairteachtarachtaí ó anad go honad ó cheanara go ceanara, bhí cuiide go freisin pártach in san bhilscoireachta a gceisiúint ráitas agus mar sin de, agus bhí riont áirithe bhar nó a chuige muoine an chuna iad hain, a bhí pártach in san scaoile agus in san chaimhlint hain. Deirtar go raibh beidir isteachas amach le gá scórbán in orda fi go fuist ag trá áirithe le líon na seachtainna móide, agus bíochas nach raibh ach trúr fácha ag geireann na seachtainna sin, bhí mrá pártach freisin in áiteanna eile go sunra chuas a bhaithe stíomhna le aram catharga bhí Countess Markovitz agus daoine eile.
Chomá le bheith catha orachar, bhí dulgas eile ar Margaret Skinnider, bhí si a gobar mar heachtar a bhrochar, ag crocha cápeisí prí hráidin na contortach a bhleaclia.
When carrying dispatches to the GPO, I saw the charge of the 5th Lancers down O'Connell Street and their repulse by fire from the GPO garrison. I also saw the hoisting of the tricolour on the GPO. For the first time in 700 years, the flag of a free Ireland floats triumphantly over Dublin City. On my return from the GPO, I saw Madam Markovitz and William Partridge turn back a column of British soldiers who were advancing down Harcourt Street. Madam had shot the 2 officers at the head of the column.
To move as a dispatch rider between positions was deadly, not only for the Irish but also for the British as well. There were many casualties on either side.
I gcuid de bhaile clia níl tarra na bit, tá sí ciún gan trácht a bit Réabhlóid. Ach a geantar eile tá tarran na horachar ga mauro. A ceir rán teachtan seo don drám sin a bhí cúnaí a lár na catharach.
There was a woman called Mrs. Byrne who was a widow who lived in 68 Malba Street, and she had promised to bring her children to Bray. She worked and she had this weekend off and told them if the weather was fine, she would bring them to Bray on the train. And at that time, going to Bray on the train was like going to New York and Concord. And they were getting ready that morning to go. And as they were getting ready and organised to go, one of the neighbours who lived in the tenement came running in and said, Mrs. Byrne, you can't go anywhere. There's a lunatic down at the GPO and he's at the reading a thing called a proclamation and they're all shooting and you can't go anywhere. And Mrs. Byrne's daughter said they spent the whole day crying because they wanted to go to Bray. And then they spent 4 days with no food. And so that's an example, that's just one family. And that was how, as a child, this woman experienced it.
A goláiste na meán lia tá General Mallon a Ganas, agus Markovich le na híomh. Tá siad a níos fhí ionsaí ófásach ó áram na Breataine in óstan na Shelburne. Tástain ó Tommy Keenan bóchal ó carrach a fórta ghlacha sa chuga, ach diúltaí an Mallon ró.
It's time you were going home, lad.
Later in the week, she planned a bombing mission to throw a couple of bombs into the Shelburne Hotel where there was a British post, and she had an argument with the commandant, Michael Mallon, who's commandant of the Irish Citizen Army on the Green, about the suitability of women for that type of task. And she used the proclamation as a legal document to kind of back up her argument that really women should be allowed, are recognised as equal before the law, and should be seen as equal participants in the struggle, that they should be allowed to participate in all aspects of it.
Socraíonn Margaret forrig na bheith ionsaí le búma luiscnach ráid arachar le stoppa chur le cúlú aram na Breataine. Mar a deisí hain, brisin Cornell Partridge an glunne, cloistear orachar, tá siad feici. Tá sé háart a deisí agus hití le fána. Tá Margaret gortaí go donna, tugtar ar eise go techaí ach tá sí cáile fola an sciupaí. Tigtar go sí cáte faoi chrí agus buil bás. Tá siad a tochailt go dain ag gar a hiocht na thorachar. Ach an gulhainte smó tar Margaret ná go bhfuil an colla ag Madam Destrócaí. Cumann Madam Grím lábh ar a rinne hama. Níos déanaí fáin Madam Díaltas ar iirecht warú Margaret, chaisí Pauline. Tar éis 3 lá géalann na Réabhlóid, agus tugtar Margaret cho fada le ospidéal naomh unsin ar aiche Stífna. Áta anan si a fe chuig seachtaí. Seán tréimh se is smeas is síl Margaret, fáin si scéal go marú Mallon. Nar a hagan iireachtas an mráidhfuil I a cheistú, churann an dochtar stop leis a rá nach chuil Margaret sách foláin. Sí Margaret Skinnider an 10 bhean a cathú I rihannaidí maach 1960. Níor stop Margaret I riamh ag glorg saoirsin na héireann. Díl sí go America ar aitis go gurí a gampa géhannaí. Nar a tháinig sí ar ais gáhachaí agus curú sa brísannaí I rith cogan na saoirse. Sin bhí sin na pá máiste don IRA I rihan cogad carrach. Chréach na Margaret Skinnider in na bhúntear scoile I mná clia.
Scríisi contas ar a cuasa féin mar a cuasa héin mar náisiúnach. Gan éon rud róhórán ní raon údar muinte móraice an, agus ar bhaile ár de haringt ar an gréasán seo go hachadóidí ag sír sin na héireann I bhí measc na neorathe, mar smuoinnig gur America agus ba deorí I héin freisin leocht deorathe chug a Halaban, agus bhí sin an dar éir sin dul I bhaim ar na deorathe eile agus a sleocht a bhí Lonnaí Hall America.
Seán téan tafad do glór Margaret Skinnider in agla faoin leabhar a scrísí Doing My Bit for Ireland, the Radio Éireann, 1940.
As a tribute to the men and women of 1916, I should like to quote from Patrick Pearse's last proclamation, April 28th, 1916. For 4 days they have fought and toiled, almost without cessation, almost without sleep. And in the intervals of fighting they have sung the songs of the freedom of Ireland. No man has complained, no man has asked why. Each individual has spent himself, happy to pour out his strength for Ireland and for freedom. If they do not win this fight, they will at least have deserved to win it. But win it they will, though they may win it in death.
The interesting thing about Margaret Skinnider and her own description of what happened in 1916 was that nobody assigned her to anything. She was at Liberty Hall, she was there like a freelance. She was a member of Cumann, but she wasn't there as a member of Cumann. She was not a member of the Citizen Army, but she'd aligned herself with Countess Markievicz. And then she followed the party, if you like, to Stephen's Green. And in Stephen's Green, she took on the role of courier and took on the role of gunwoman and cyclist. But nobody appointed her to any of this. She took it on herself.
She certainly politically carried on in an oppositional frame of mind, really, and in a revolutionary frame of mind. For her, this was, and it's a hackneyed phrase, but for her, this was an unfinished revolution.
Nar a hína Michael Collins an cunra Angla éireannach an 1921. Níor lach Margaret Skinnider leis, chomá le mrá eile in nos Countess Markievicz.
Well, no, tá lánscríomh a bhí Countess Markievicz agus is ban ionach tábhachtach a bhí ann níorán gur cheanara a bhíontí ar is seachtainna cásca. Ach tá nó é táhachaí an céad ban a táhach go sa Parliament of Westminster in 1880 agus níor chuí si trasna dar nó go Westminster ní ghlach siad an siochan sin. Agus an céad ban a tháinig mar ara rialtas. Níor fuair si bás níd ag fiche seach ceapan san níor si timpeall mór an níag an tréimhse seo ach cinnte gur ceantar na daoine, ceann ceantar na mrás tábhachtaí, ach ceantar na daoine is tábhachtaí a bhí ag tríd agus a bhí páirteach sa políteach sa tréimhse seo.
There's a similarity, I think, as well after the treaty that Margaret Skinnider, like Markievicz in many ways, becomes very disillusioned with nationalist politics. She becomes an awful lot more alienated.
As time went on, like we all do, we all grow older and we mature. And I think, she matured into, she was still very involved in the Republican movement. I think that we haven't really heard the story of the 1916 Rising from a broad spectrum, if you like, because since the 1930s, we have been listening to and reading, and academics have been following this idea of the Fianna Fáil version of history, not a history of women. Social history has not been explored. 259 men, women and children died. They were civilians. The youngest was 2. Really, if we are going to grow up as a nation, there should be a plaque somewhere to commemorate the people who died. And yet when it comes to 1916 in Dublin, there is an absolute silence.
Lean si ra go láidir in glúiseacht na poblachta ach go speisialta in glúiseacht na Geard Cumann. Bhí saol fadacha ina gníomhar a Geard Cumann in éireann. In aimsir a tairstát, go speisialtans an INTO, mar ar tháinig sí chun cín agus go éirí teachtasteach ina chuchtarrán stóla mar an INTO lár na gaigadaí, agus is léir go neacha sí bhaim ar anna chuid mrá óga le níiad héna chuir dró na caibhlinte ar son na héiti chlé agus ar son sír sin na héireann, agus lena ceartúirte nóair tháinig sé go dtí uair a báis féin. Chailehí a bhhar de paibli in ospedéidim nachlí mar an úirtí, má bhí an áitsin sách má don gná ghuine bhí sé sách máide.
She's a dramatic persona, and that daring she had, but she was an intelligent and quite an intellectual woman as well, as well as a woman of action. And most people like that are interesting, and certainly she deserves a lot more study than she's had to date.
Ní dát féin spéir ná gur dánaí a saoil agus a dúthracht ar fad ar son an lochtaigre agus nuair bhí cogan an síirse agus éirí amach néidir go séidir an bhí an áit di níor fós séiríomh ach gníomhare feachtasáir agus ceart Cumannach dingeháilte ba dhéhí gur chorgamach níos mó trachtarí ná mar tá.
In the final episode of Réabhlóid, an iconic photograph unveils a mysterious secret of the surrender in 1916. A young nurse's convictions put her at the heart of the action in the GPO. But why has Elizabeth O'Farrell's name almost been erased from the history books?